Tutorial, we're going to talk about creating a website layout using CSS styles. In order to do so, I want to make sure that my sandbox site is open in the file panel. Also want to make sure that I've gone to File, Close All to ensure that all pages are closed. Next, I'm going to go to File, New. I'm going to select a new HTML template from the document type column and click Create. I will save that by hitting Control S, and I'm going to name this Layout Template and click Save. Recognize that that file will automatically save in my templates folder without me having to do anything, and I also did not name it using an extension .dwt. Dreamweaver did all that for me. The next step I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new CSS sheet. File, New. This time I'm choosing CSS from the document type and clicking Create. I'm going to save this file by hitting Control S, and I'm going to name it Layout, ensuring that I'm saving it in my styles folder for this project. And I don't need to worry about adding an extension on that either. I'm just going to simply name it Layout and click the Save button. That being said, I'll go back over into my template page. Notice that step is really important, ensuring that I'm going back over and I'm selecting the template file, not the CSS file. From within there, I can make sure that if I have this layout page open and I close that, I can go to File, Attach Style Sheet. And it's now going to allow me to browse and locate that style sheet in the styles folder that I just created. Notice that I closed that CSS file in order to get access to the File, Attach Style Sheet, and click OK. And lastly, OK. And you should then see down here below in line number 10 that it in fact has connected or attached the layout style sheet. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to assign a style to the body tag in order to make sure that the body tag is connected to the style sheet. So with the CSS Designer panel turned on, I have created a selector type. So I'm going to press the plus and I'm going to hit enter. And remember, the properties of this body tag are going to be in the properties panel. So you can move these properties around. Remember, if you can't see everything, left click and hold, drag that up. You can also left click and hold and drag it over so the property panel lays out directly next to these other panels. I'm also going to make sure that the show set option box is turned off so I can see all properties in the below categories. So in this particular page, right after the body tag, I'm going to make sure that the body tag is active, and I'm going to now simply create a background color. I have my body style selected. I'm going to choose a color, and that color is going to be hex code 999, which is a dark gray. When I type that in the hex code box, I'm simply going to press enter, and that is very quickly how you can tell that you've appropriately connected your layout CSS to your source code page. So now that I know that things are okay, I'm going to then go ahead and make sure that I set the shorthand for the margin found in the layout tab. I'm going to make sure that I set all margins to be 0, hitting enter prior to moving forward. So as I'm moving forward, I'm now going to go over into the code view, and I'm going to make sure that my cursor is directly below. If there's any text in there, I'm going to get rid of that. And I want to make sure that my cursor is directly below the body tag. At this point, we're going to put a divider in. Dividers are used to create your own label on the page, and the divider tag is on the HTML panel, insert panel, the first button there, and you notice when I roll over it says div. You can also go to insert div. And I'm going to insert the div at the insertion point, line 14, And I'm going to make sure that I go down to the ID. This is going to be a div ID selector. And I'm going to name this wrapper, WRAPPER. And I'm also then going to select right below that new CSS rule. And you should get this panel box. Before I do anything to select and change this wrapper selector, I want to make sure that when I define this rule, that it is going to be defined. And you'll notice when I hit the drop down, that layout CSS page we've created earlier will be an option. If it's not, you need to make sure that you go back and create that CSS style sheet, save it in your styles folder so that you can attach it for your future rule definitions. At this point, I have an ID selector. I've named it wrapper, and recognize I did not add in the previous step the number sign or pound symbol. Dreamweaver automatically did that for me, but that is very important to recognize that it is indeed a pound symbol and the name of your selector. And lastly, it's been defined in the layout CSS. Press OK. Now I am going to give this particular sector selector a few property changes. And the number one change I'm going to make is I'm going to give this a background color of pound symbol FFF. And you will see that that is a shortcut for white. I also want to give this a width in the box category of 1,000. And I'm going to leave that pixels. I'm going to go down to the bottom in the margin category, and I am going to set just the right margin to be auto and the left margin to be auto. We'll talk about why we're doing that in a few minutes, but that's only in the margin category for the right and left margins. I'm lastly going to go to the border category, and I'm going to choose a solid border. And notice in this case, I'm leaving same for all turned on. I'm going to give this a 1 pixel. When I type in 1, the pixel px shorthand will be automatically there for me. And lastly, the color, I am just going to select the color black and hit enter. After I've chosen those items, I'm going to click OK. And when you look at your page, if I go to the design view and I move these things over, you should see that I now have this white box that's 1,000 pixels wide. The reason why we set the margin right and left to be auto is because now it'll automatically center itself on the page for me. And it's laid on top of my gray background that is set in my body tag. Okay, so I'm going to go back into the split view, and I'm also going to turn on my panels again. And I do not need this default text that Dreamweaver added for me to show up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the code view, and I'm going to highlight that text, and I'm going to delete it. But what I'm also going to do is I'm also going to space down this final div. And if you remember, when we were going to be adding comments in our HTML lesson, we have a shortcut in Dreamweaver. And you notice that over here in this side panel that I can apply a comment, and I'm going to apply an HTML comment by clicking on this little box here. And I'm going to say wrap end. The reason being is because in the future, we're going to have a number of divs, and this particular div right here is just going to be kind of a generic div, and I don't know what it's connected to. Whereas if I add this comment, I know that this div is ending my wrapper div that will be pretty far up in the code after we add more elements below this tag here. Make sure that you hit either this button to save all or file, save all, to ensure that both your CSS sheet and your code sheet or source code is being saved. So now I have this body tag and I also have a wrapper ID. I'm now going to begin building my page by adding new div layers or div layout objects. So the next one I'm going to do, and I'm going to place my cursor right below my wrapper, same thing. I'm going to use the div. This is going to be an ID, and I'm going to call this one banner. I'm going to add a new CSS rule. And recognize now the second go around layout is automatically selected for me. So as long as I give it a quick once over, I can see that my banner is going to be applied in my rule. I'm going to click OK. Now in this example, I'm going to change the background color of my banner to be pound F93, which as you'll see is a color orange. And I'm also going to go to the box category and simply give this a height of 100 pixels and press OK. And OK one second time, and you'll now notice that what we just did is we now have created inside of the wrapper tag a banner, and it says simply content for banner goes here. I usually like to give these elements a color and also leave this code in there for the time being, just so that I know where these elements are on the page, and the different colors of them initially will help me see that my layout is actually being correctly created on the page. I'm going to continue moving forward and make sure my cursor is below my banner tag. And at this point, I'm going to add again another div. And this div ID is going to be nav. Click new CSS rule. Ensure all these are set properly. Hit OK. I'm going to create a background. And I'm going to give this a background color pound 000. And when I'm creating that, the 000 background color is going to give us the shortcut for the hex code of black. You can also just add all the zeros if you like for the back color, but it's not necessary. A lot of times hex codes will just use the first 3 characters of many colors. I'm also going to set in the type the color, which is actually the color of the text. I'm going to make that white, and the shortcut for white is going to be 3 Fs. Enter. Notice that by typing in 3 Fs, it gave me automatically that full color of F. And lastly, I'm going to go to the box category, and I'm going to set the height of this nav to be approximately 50 pixels high. Click OK. Click OK. And you now have, notice it's stacked right underneath. And one key point that I want to mention about these previously 2 created divs is the fact that when I look at my CSS, recognize that I did not set a width category for either my banner or my nav. I've only chosen to use the height category because the height will be defined in the CSS, but the wrapper of being 1,000 pixels will contain those below elements. So nothing can be wider than 1,000 pixels. So 100 high, assume that it's going to be fitting in a wrapper that's encompassing this whole entire layout of 1,000 pixels. So I'm not being redundant in adding that width factor down in these after divs. So I'm going to go back to my source code. I'm going to place my cursor directly below my nav. Now I'm going to add another for my main content. I'm going to add a div, and I'm going to call this div ID main. New CSS rule, verify, OK. And for the main, I am simply going to give the box padding, and I'm going to leave same for all I'm going to give that 10 pixels of padding. And after I click OK 2 times, padding is going to be the inner space of the element. So this space right here from the left edge of my word content and the outer edge here of this new div ID called main, the padding is going to be that space that separates everything in the middle. And I'm just going to continue to leave these elements here, recognizing I am changing colors so I can begin to see my layout on the page. And I've got one more div that I want to add, and that's going to be the footer. So I'm placing my div cursor, below my last main, div ID, footer, new CSS rule, verify, OK. And this footer, I'm going to give a background color of pound F as in Frank, 9-3. I'm going to match that color with my orange from the top, kind of create a nice little bookend on the top and bottom of my page. I am going to go to the block category, and here I can align my text in the center, text align center, so that I don't have to do it in the HTML. I can actually do it within the CSS. And lastly, the box category, I'm going to add a height of 50. Press OK. Press OK a second time, and you can now see that where my final element has been included on the page. From this point forward, I can simply add some basic content information. I know that the nav is going to go here. I will leave that here. I'm going to go into my main container, and I'm going to write page headline. I'm going to define this as an H1 so that I now know what page that is on. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to add some what is called some placeholder text. And if you are looking at the CSS designer panel, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip back into panels, or I want you to locate the snippets panel. If you don't see that below here, if you've closed it in the past, you could simply go to Window, and you want to ensure that snippets are turned on. Snippets are a way that Dreamweaver creates small, already pre-existing lines of code for many different various functions that you might be using for a website. In the HTML snippets category, if I scroll down, the second snippet from the top is called Add Lorem. And if I left click, I can hold and drag these over, and it might give you a little bit of a better idea of what these are. And as you can see here by the description, lorem ipsum is quick dummy text. So what I'm going to do is inside of my page content area, or the main div, if I'm looking into here, I'm going to simply add this lorem ipsum placeholder text by double clicking on this lorem ipsum. And you'll notice that what it did is it placed it in between that paragraph tag that was below my headline. And you can see it's just dummy text, as they say, but it gives me an idea of what my text will look like and what my layout is going to look like with content information in there. So if I look at my design view and I get rid of all my panels, you should have something that looks very similar to this. I'm going to save everything by either clicking this button or File, Save All. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to preview my layout in the Google Chrome browser. And if you look carefully in your browser window, you should now see a layout beginning to take place. In the next video, what we'll do is we'll start formatting this information and make it look like a website instead of just this random grid of a layout. Thanks for watching. Take care.